The summer of 1997 felt endless to 16-year-old Jake Morrison. With his parents away for the weekend visiting his grandmother, he'd convinced his best friend Tommy Chen to sleep over, planning to stay up all night playing the new PlayStation, and maybe sneak a beer or two from his dad's stash in the garage. "Dude, your room is so much cooler than mine," Tommy said, flopping onto Jake's bed and staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars plastered across the ceiling. "My mom would never let me have a mini fridge." Jake grinned, pulling 2 sodas from the small refrigerator wedged between his desk and dresser. "Took me 3 months of lawn mowing to afford it, but totally worth it." He tossed a Pepsi to Tommy, who caught it with one hand while fumbling for the TV remote with the other. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from outside Jake's bedroom window. Kira Voss had been observing this particular house for weeks as part of her reconnaissance assignment. At first glance, she appeared to be just another human teenager. Shoulder-length auburn hair, bright green eyes, and the kind of effortless beauty that would make her blend seamlessly into any high school hallway. But beneath her carefully crafted, human exterior lay something far more complex. She was what her people called a scout, part of an advanced team sent to study human behavior and social structures. For months, she'd been living undercover in the nearby town, attending the local high school and perfecting her human mannerisms. Tonight was supposed to be her final observation before reporting back to her superiors. But as she watched Jake and Tommy laughing over their video games, something unexpected stirred within her. She'd grown fond of human emotions during her time here, particularly their capacity for joy and friendship. The 2 boys reminded her of the companions she'd left behind on her homeworld, and for a moment, she felt genuinely homesick. An impulsive idea formed in her mind. What harm could there be in one small interaction? Just a harmless prank to satisfy her curiosity about human reactions to surprise and fear. Her people had always been told that humans were simple, predictable creatures, but her observations suggested otherwise. Moving with the fluid grace that betrayed her non-human origins, Kira scaled the side of the house with ease. The window to Jake's room was slightly ajar, to let in the cool evening air. She slipped inside silently, her enhanced hearing picking up every word of the boys' conversation about tomorrow's plans to go swimming at Miller's Pond. The closet door stood slightly open, revealing a dark interior filled with clothes, sports, equipment, and the accumulated detritus of teenage life. It would be perfect. She could hide inside, wait for the right moment, then jump out and give them a good scare. She'd seen similar pranks in the human movies she'd studied, always resulting in laughter once the initial shock wore off. What Kira didn't know was that Jake's closet was far from ordinary. The house, like dozens of others in the neighborhood, had been selected by her people's advanced engineers decades earlier. Hidden within the walls, invisible to human detection, lay dormant stasis technology, part of a larger network designed to facilitate her species' eventual colonization plans. As she stepped into the closet, pulling the door almost closed behind her, Kira felt a strange tingling sensation along her skin. The sensation intensified, and suddenly the air around her began to shimmer with an otherworldly blue light. "What's happening?" she whispered, but her voice seemed to echo strangely, as if coming from very far away. The tingling became a numbness that spread from her fingertips up her arms. She tried to step back out of the closet, but her muscles wouldn't respond. The blue light grew brighter, and she felt herself becoming lighter, as if her very molecules were being suspended in crystalline amber. Her last conscious thought before the stasis field fully engaged was a desperate hope that someone would find her soon. Outside the closet, Jake paused his game controller mid-combo. "Did you hear something?" Tommy looked up from where he was, rifling through Jake's CD collection. "Like what?" "I thought I heard a voice, like someone whispering." Jake glanced toward his closet, but the door appeared to be closed just as he'd left it, when he'd grabbed a clean shirt earlier that evening. "Probably just the house settling," Tommy said with a shrug. "My place makes weird noises all the time. Drives my mom crazy." Jake nodded, though something felt off. There was an odd quality to the air in his room, a subtle electric charge that raised the hair on his arms, but the feeling passed quickly, and soon he and Tommy were absorbed once again in their game, the controller battle becoming increasingly competitive as the night wore on. Hours later, as dawn crept through the bedroom window, Both boys had finally succumbed to exhaustion. They lay sprawled across Jake's bed and floor respectively, controllers still clutched in their hands, the TV displaying a frozen game-over screen. Inside the closet, Kira Voss remained perfectly preserved in temporal suspension, invisible to any form of detection. The alien technology that was meant to protect advanced scouts had instead become her prison, triggered by her own people's safeguards, in a cruel twist of irony. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months, and months to years. Jake finished high school, went to college, and eventually moved away to start his career. His parents occasionally mentioned cleaning out his old room, but somehow the closet remained undisturbed, sealed by technology that ensured it would stay that way until the time was right. 20 years would pass before that seal would finally break, and when it did, both Jake and Kira's lives would change forever. But for now, time itself had forgotten the girl who'd only wanted to share in a moment of human laughter, leaving her suspended between heartbeats in a darkness that would stretch across 2 decades. Jake Morrison stood in the doorway of his childhood bedroom, dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight that filtered through windows he hadn't seen in over a decade. At 36, he carried himself with the confident bearing of a successful architect, but returning to this house after his parents' funeral had stripped away years of carefully constructed emotional armor. The room felt smaller than he remembered, filled with the ghostly echoes of his teenage years. His old bed remained, along with the desk where he'd struggled through calculus homework and the mini-fridge that had seemed like such a luxury back then. Everything was exactly as he'd left it when he'd moved out for college, preserved like a shrine to his adolescence. "I should have visited more," he murmured to the empty room, guilt settling heavily in his chest. His parents had always understood his need to establish himself in the city, but now their absence felt like a physical ache. He'd spent the morning going through his father's study and his mother's sewing room, but he'd been avoiding this space. Too many memories, too much emotion. Now, with the estate sale scheduled for next week, he had no choice but to face the remnants of his youth. Jake started with the obvious items: old textbooks that could be donated, clothes that no longer fit, electronic gadgets that had long since become obsolete. The work was methodical, almost meditative, until he reached the closet. The door stood slightly ajar, just as it always had, but something felt different. There was an energy in the air, a subtle vibration that made his skin prickle with recognition. He'd felt this sensation before 20 years ago during that sleepover with Tommy, but he'd dismissed it as imagination. As he reached for the closet door handle, the vibration intensified. The metal felt unusually warm beneath his fingers, and for a moment he could have sworn he heard a sound from within, like someone taking a deep, shuddering breath. "Hello?" he called out, feeling ridiculous. The house had been empty for 3 months since his mother's passing. There was no way anyone could be inside. The moment his fingers closed around the handle and turned it, everything changed. The door swung open with a sound like breaking glass, though nothing shattered. Light erupted from within the closet, not the harsh white of a bulb, but a soft, otherworldly blue that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. And then, as if the very air had become solid and suddenly released its hold, a figure tumbled forward into his arms. Jake staggered backward, his architect's reflexes keeping them both from falling, as a young woman collapsed against his chest. She was petite, with auburn hair that caught the strange light still emanating from the closet, and she was wearing clothes that looked like they belonged in a 1990s time capsule. Baggy jeans, a flannel shirt, and sneakers that had definitely seen better days. But it was her face that made his breath catch. She was beautiful in an almost ethereal way, with sharp cheekbones and eyes so green they seemed to glow with their own inner light. And she looked exactly, impossibly, like she was still 16 years old. "Please," she gasped, her voice carrying an accent he couldn't quite place. "Please don't hurt me. I don't understand what happened. Where am I?" Jake found himself holding her steady, acutely aware of how perfectly she fit against him despite their height difference. "You're safe," he said automatically, though he had no idea if that was true. "You're in my house. But how did you... Who are you?" She looked up at him with those incredible green eyes, and he saw fear there, but also something else. A flicker of recognition that made no sense. "You're Jake," she whispered. "You're older now, but you're still Jake Morrison. I remember you." The words hit him like a physical blow. "How do you know my name? How do you remember me? I've never seen you before in my life." Kira, though he didn't know her name yet, pulled back slightly, studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You really don't remember, do you? That night 20 years ago, you and your friend Tommy were playing video games. I was going to—" She trailed off, confusion clouding her features. "But that was just last night, wasn't it? 20 years ago?" Jake's voice came out rougher than he intended. "That's impossible. You can't be more than 17 or 18 years old." "I don't understand," she said, and the vulnerability in her voice did something to his chest. "Everything feels wrong. The air tastes different, and you're so much older than you should be." Without thinking, Jake reached up to touch her face, his thumb brushing along her cheekbone. Her skin was warm and impossibly soft, and she leaned into the contact like she was starving for human touch. "This is crazy," he murmured, but he didn't pull his hand away. "You should be in your 30s if you knew me 20 years ago, but you look exactly like you did when you were—" He stopped, a memory surfacing. Not of seeing her, but of sensing her. That night with Tommy. The feeling that someone else was in the room. The whispered voice he'd dismissed as imagination. "You were here," he said slowly. "That night you were actually here." Tears began to roll down her cheeks and she nodded. "I was hiding in your closet. I just wanted to scare you like in the movies. But something went wrong. There was light. And then— nothing. Until now." The rational part of Jake's mind insisted this was impossible. People didn't just appear from closets after 20 years without aging. But the evidence was literally in his arms, warm and real and trembling against him. "Hey," he said softly, his other arm coming around her waist to hold her closer. "It's okay. We'll figure this out." She looked up at him again, and this time there was something else in her expression. A dawning awareness of their closeness, of the way his hands felt against her skin, of how his presence seemed to anchor her in this confusing new reality. "You're safe now," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Am I?" she asked, but she wasn't talking about physical safety anymore. The air between them crackled with tension, with the impossibility of their situation and the undeniable pull they felt toward each other. She was a stranger, but she wasn't. She was young enough to be inappropriate, but she wasn't really young. She was lost in time, displaced, as adrift as he felt in his own life. When she rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The kiss was soft, tentative, tasting of tears and desperation and something indefinably otherworldly. Jake knew he should pull away, should ask more questions, should do anything other than kiss this mysterious girl who'd appeared from his closet like something out of a fairy tale. Instead, he deepened the kiss, his hands tangling in her auburn hair, and let himself fall into the impossibility of the moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kira rested her forehead against his chest. "I don't even know your name," Jake said. "Kira," she whispered. "Kira Voss." "Kira," he repeated, liking the way it felt on his tongue. "We need to figure out what happened to you, how you were in that closet for 20 years without aging." She nodded against his chest, but neither of them moved to separate. The closet behind them had returned to normal. No more blue light, no more strange vibrations. Just an ordinary closet filled with ordinary things, but nothing about this situation was ordinary. And as Jake held Kira in his childhood bedroom, he realized his carefully ordered life was about to become something far more complicated and infinitely more dangerous than he could possibly imagine. The next few days passed in a surreal haze of adaptation and discovery. Jake had called in sick to work, something he'd never done in his 15-year career. and dedicated himself to helping Kira navigate a world that had moved forward without her. The technology gap hit her hardest. She stared at his smartphone like it was alien artifact, which Jake was beginning to suspect it might as well have been to her. When he showed her how to use the touchscreen, her fingers trembled against the glass. "In my time," she said, then caught herself. "I mean, when I last remember, phones had cords and buttons. This is like something from Star Trek." They were sitting on his couch. He'd moved into his parents' house temporarily to help her adjust, and Jake found himself studying her profile as she marveled at the device. In the 3 days since her emergence from the closet, he'd learned that she had an insatiable curiosity about everything, from the flat-screen TV to the way his coffee maker worked. "What else is different?" he asked, genuinely interested in her perspective. Kira set down the phone and turned to face him, tucking one leg beneath her. "Everything and nothing. People still laugh, still cry, still fall in love. But the way they connect with each other." She gestured at the phone. "It's like you're all living in multiple worlds at once. Some would say that's not necessarily a good thing." "Maybe not," she agreed. "But it's fascinating. Your species—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes widening as if she'd said something she shouldn't have. "My species." Jake leaned forward, catching the slip. "That's an odd way to put it." Color flooded her cheeks. "I just meant humans in general. You know how sometimes you feel separate from everyone else?" He did know that feeling, actually. It was part of why he'd thrown himself so completely into his work, why his relationships always seemed to end with women telling him he was emotionally unavailable, but somehow with Kira, that familiar distance felt impossible to maintain. "Tell me about your family," he said, changing the subject but filing away her strange phrasing. "Where are they? They must be worried about you." The question brought a shadow across her features. "I don't have family. Not here, anyway. I lived alone. That's why no one missed me when I disappeared." The sadness in her voice made his chest ache. Without thinking, he reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "You're not alone. Now." She looked down at their joined hands, and when she met his eyes again, there was something raw and vulnerable in her expression. "Jake, I need to tell you something. About what I really am, about why—" She was interrupted by a sharp knock at the front door. They both froze, and Jake noticed how Kira immediately tensed, like a deer sensing a predator. "Are you expecting someone?" she whispered. "No." He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Stay here. I'll see who it is." But when he looked through the peephole, he saw his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, holding a casserole dish and looking concerned. "Jake, dear," she said when he opened the door. "I've been meaning to bring this over since the funeral. I know how hard it's been for you." "That's very kind, Mrs. Patterson." He accepted the dish, trying to block her view into the house. "I couldn't help but notice there have been lights on at all hours," she continued, craning her neck to peer past him. "I hope you're not having trouble sleeping. Grief can do terrible things to a person's rest." "I'm fine, just sorting through things. Thank you for the casserole." But Mrs. Patterson wasn't easily deterred. "Is that music I've been hearing? It sounded like someone crying the other night." Jake's stomach dropped. Kira had indeed cried several times as the reality of her situation sank in. 20 years lost, everyone she might have known moved on or gone. He'd held her through those tears, and each sob had felt like a knife to his heart. "Just the TV," he said quickly. "I'll try to keep it down." After he finally managed to close the door, he found Kira standing in the hallway, having obviously heard every word. "I'm causing problems for you," she said quietly. "No, you're not." He set the casserole on the side table and moved toward her. "Mrs. Patterson has been the neighborhood busybody for 30 years. This is nothing new." But Kira shook her head. "I don't belong here, Jake. I don't belong in this time, in this world. Maybe I should just leave." "And go where?" The thought of her leaving sent panic through him. "You don't have identification, money, anywhere to go, and even if you did—" He stopped, realizing what he was about to admit. "What?" "I don't want you to leave." he said simply. These past few days you hear? It's the first time in years that I've felt like I'm actually living instead of just existing. She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her internal struggle playing out across her features. Finally, she closed the distance between them, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. I feel the same way, she whispered. But, Jake, there are things about me that you don't understand. Things that might change how you feel. Try me. Instead of answering, she rose up on her toes and kissed him. This time there was nothing tentative about it. Her lips moved against his with a hunger that matched his own, and when he backed her against the wall, she made a soft sound of approval that went straight to his core. His hands found the hem of her borrowed t-shirt, one of his old ones that hung loose on her smaller frame, and she didn't protest when he slipped his fingers beneath the fabric to touch bare skin. She was impossibly soft, impossibly warm, and when she arched against him, he could feel the rapid beat of her heart. Kira, he murmured against her neck, tasting the salt of her skin. I know this is crazy, she breathed, her fingers tangling in his hair. I know we barely know each other, but it doesn't feel that way, he finished for her. No, it doesn't. They moved together toward his bedroom, his parents' old bedroom, which felt strange but not wrong somehow. When they reached the bed, Kira turned in his arms, her green eyes searching his face. Are you sure? He asked, because despite the fire in his veins, he needed to know she wanted this as much as he did. I've been suspended between moments for 20 years, she said, her hands beginning to work at the buttons of his shirt. I don't want to wait anymore. What followed was tender and passionate and unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Kira responded to his touch like she'd been starving for it, and when he worshipped every inch of her revealed skin with his mouth and hands, she made sounds that drove him to the edge of reason. When they finally came together, moving in a rhythm, as old as time itself, Jake felt like he was finally truly awake for the first time in his adult life. And when Kira cried out his name as she shattered beneath him, he knew that whatever secrets she was keeping, whatever impossible circumstances had brought her to him, he was never letting her go. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the lamplight, Kira traced patterns on his chest with her fingertip. Jake, she said quietly. What if I told you I wasn't entirely human? He stilled, processing her words. What would that mean exactly? It would mean that everything you think you know about the world is about to change. Jake considered this, then pulled her closer against his side. Then I guess we'll figure it out together. But even as he said the words, he could feel the weight of unspoken truths hanging between them, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered that their troubles were just beginning. The dream started on their 5th night together. Jake woke to find Kira sitting bolt upright in bed, her skin covered in a sheen of sweat, her eyes wide with terror and something else. Recognition. They're coming, she whispered, her voice carrying that strange accent more strongly than usual. I can feel them in my mind. Who's coming? Jake sat up, immediately alert. Kira, you're safe. It was just a dream. But she shook her head violently, her auburn hair whipping around her shoulders. Not a dream. Memories. They're returning. And with them, she pressed her palms against her temples. Oh God, what have I done? The change in her was dramatic and frightening. Gone was the uncertain, vulnerable girl who'd tumbled from his closet. In her place sat someone else entirely. Someone with ancient knowledge burning behind those green eyes. I remember now, she said, her voice taking on an otherworldly quality. I remember everything. My name is Kira Voss, but that's not my real name. I am what you would call an alien, part of an advanced scouting team sent to study human behavior and prepare for. She couldn't finish the sentence. Jake felt the world tilt beneath him. Prepare for what? Colonization, she whispered. My people have been placing dormant technology in strategic locations across your planet for decades. The stasis field in your closet. It was never meant to trap me. It was meant to preserve me if I was discovered. until extraction could be arranged. The rational part of his mind wanted to reject this, to dismiss it as delusion or elaborate fantasy. But he'd seen the impossible blue light, felt the strange energy that surrounded her, and looking at her now, he could see the truth written in every line of her face. But the extraction never came, he said. No. Tears began to stream down her cheeks. I was 17 in your years, the equivalent of barely an adult by my people's standards. I was supposed to observe and report, nothing more. But I got curious about human emotions, human connections. I started to feel things that my kind aren't supposed to feel. Jake reached for her, but she flinched away. Don't you understand? She said desperately. I'm everything you've been taught to fear. I'm the enemy. You're the woman I'm falling in love with, he said simply. The words hung between them like a bridge over an impossible chasm. Kira stared at him, her expression cycling through disbelief, hope, and terror. You can't love me, she whispered. Not when you know what I am. What you are, Jake said, moving closer despite her tension, is someone who's been alone and afraid for 20 years. Someone who chose to trust me with the truth even though it could destroy everything between us. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. I don't care if you're from Mars or the moon or another dimension entirely. I care about you. She searched his face for any sign of deception, and found none. With a sob, she collapsed, against him, and he held her as she cried. Not the tears of confusion she'd shed before, but the deeper grief of someone confronting their own choices and their consequences. There's more, she said eventually, her voice muffled against his chest. Now that my memories have returned, they'll be able to track me. The technology that preserved me, it's active again, sending out a signal. My people will come for me, and when they do, what will they do to you? To me? Nothing. I'll be debriefed, possibly punished for my emotional contamination, but I'll survive. She pulled back to look at him. But you, Jake, you know too much now. And humans who know too much about us don't get to keep that knowledge. The threat was clear, but instead of fear, Jake felt a surge of protectiveness so strong it surprised him. Then we'll have to make sure they don't find us. You don't understand. They have technology beyond your comprehension. There's nowhere on Earth we could hide. Maybe not, Jake agreed. But I'm not giving up without a fight. Something in his tone must have reached her, because for the first time since her memories had returned, Kira smiled. Not the uncertain expression of the lost girl, but something fierce and determined. You really mean that, don't you? I really do. She studied his face for a long moment, then made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Rising to her knees on the bed, she began to remove the oversized t-shirt she'd been sleeping in. Kira, you don't have to. Yes, I do, she said, her voice steady and sure. If they're coming for us, if this might be our last night together, then I want all of you. I want you to know all of me. What followed was different from their previous love-making. This time there was desperation beneath the passion. A need to claim and be claimed that went beyond physical desire. When Kira moved above him, her alien grace evident in every fluid motion, Jake felt like he was seeing her true self for the first time. She was luminous in the moonlight, her skin seeming to glow with its own inner light. When he traced the elegant line of her spine, she arched like a cat, making sounds that were definitely not entirely human. And when she looked down at him with those impossibly green eyes, he saw depths there that spoke of starlight and distances beyond human comprehension. I love you, she gasped as they moved together, and the words carried the weight of worlds. I love you too, he replied, and meant it with every cell in his body. They made love with the intensity of lovers about to go to war, claiming each other with teeth and tongues and whispered promises. And when they finally collapsed together, spent and breathing hard, Jake held her close and made a silent vow that whatever came next, he would not let them take her from him. As if summoned by his thoughts, a low humming sound began to emanate from somewhere in the house. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but it grew steadily stronger until the windows began to vibrate in their frames. Kira sat up abruptly, her face pale. "They're here." Outside, the night sky began to glow, with an all-too-familiar blue light, and Jake realized that their time of peace was over. The real test of their love was about to begin. The blue light outside intensified until it was brighter than daylight, casting stark shadows through the bedroom windows. Jake and Kira dressed quickly, the humming sound growing louder with each passing second until it seemed to vibrate through their bones. "How many?" Jake asked, pulling on jeans and a t-shirt while Kira struggled into her borrowed clothes. "3, maybe 4, she replied, her enhanced hearing picking up subtleties he couldn't detect. "A standard retrieval team." She caught his arm as he reached for the bedroom door. "Jake, listen to me. They'll try to separate us immediately. Whatever happens, don't let them take me without you." "I won't," he promised, though he had no idea how he could stop beings with technology far beyond human capability. They made their way downstairs, the house shaking now with the proximity of whatever craft hovered above them. Through the living room window, Jake could see his neighbors' houses standing dark and silent. Somehow the aliens had managed to isolate just this property. The front door burst open without anyone touching it, and 3 figures stepped inside. At first glance they looked human, tall, attractive people in form-fitting black uniforms, but their movements were too fluid, too precise, and their eyes held the same otherworldly quality as Kira's, though theirs were cold silver instead of warm green. The leader, a woman with platinum hair and sharp features, spoke first. Her voice carried an authority that made the air itself seem to listen. "Scout designation 779, she addressed Kira, ignoring Jake entirely. "You have been missing for 20 standard cycles. Explain." "There was a malfunction," Kira replied, slipping into a formal posture Jake had never seen from her. "The preservation protocol activated prematurely. I've been in stasis until recently." "Impossible. Our scans show continuous low-level brain activity. You have been conscious and mobile for several rotations." The leader's silver eyes flicked to Jake with obvious distaste. "And you have been contaminated." Jake stepped forward, placing himself partially in front of Kira. "She's not contaminated, she's free." All 3 aliens turned their attention to him then, and he felt the weight of their regard like a physical force. The leader tilted her head with predatory interest. "Fascinating. The human believes it has a say in this matter." She looked back at Kira. "Have you shared classified information with this creature?" "His name is Jake," Kira said firmly. "And yes, I have told him the truth about who I am and why I was here." A ripple of what might have been shock passed between the 3 aliens. The leader's expression hardened. "Then you know what must be done," she said. "The human's memories must be wiped, and you must return for reconditioning." "No," Kira said, simply. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Jake could see the other 2 aliens shifting into more aggressive postures, their hands moving to devices at their belts. "This is not a request, 779. And this is not compliance." "Commander Veltar," Kira stepped out from behind Jake, moving to stand beside him. "I choose to remain here." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Commander Veltar's silver eyes blazed with cold fire. "You would choose this primitive creature over your own kind, over the glory of the expansion?" "I choose love over conquest," Kira replied. "I choose growth over stagnation. I choose Jake." Jake felt his heart swell with pride and terror in equal measure. She had chosen him, truly chosen him, but he could see the cost written in the rigid line of her shoulders. "Then you both die," Veltar said matter-of-factly, raising a device that looked like a cross between a gun and a tuning fork. What happened next unfolded in seconds but felt like hours. Jake, drawing on years of studying architectural plans and spatial relationships, noted the positions of the 3 aliens relative to the room's structural elements. As Veltar's weapon began to emit that familiar blue glow, he grabbed Kira's, hand and dove sideways, pulling her behind the heavy oak dining table his father had built decades ago. The energy blast carved through the air where they'd been standing, leaving a smoldering gouge in the hardwood floor. But Jake's architectural eye had served him well. The table provided cover while putting them closer to the kitchen door. The basement, he whispered to Kira as another blast shattered a picture frame above their heads. There's a root cellar my grandfather dug during the Cold War. It's lined with lead. Understanding flashed in her eyes. Lead would interfere with their scanning technology, buying them precious time. They made a desperate sprint for the kitchen as the aliens advanced, energy weapons charging with ominous whines. Jake kicked open the basement door just as another blast scorched the wall beside his head, and they tumbled down the wooden stairs in a controlled fall. The basement was dark and musty, filled with decades of accumulated storage. Jake led Kira to the far corner where a narrow door was almost hidden behind old Christmas decorations and his mother's canning supplies. In here, he gasped, pulling open the heavy door to reveal a small chamber carved into the earth itself, its walls lined with sheets of dull gray metal. They squeezed inside just as footsteps thundered down the basement stairs. In the cramped space barely large enough for both of them, Jake could feel Kira's heart racing against his chest. They can't scan through lead, she whispered, but they'll find us eventually through systematic searching. Then we need a plan, Jake replied. What are their weaknesses? Arrogance, she said immediately. They've never encountered real resistance from humans. They expect compliance, not creativity. Above them, they could hear the aliens methodically searching, their movements precise and efficient. It would only be a matter of minutes before they found the hidden room. The house's electrical system, Jake said suddenly. Your people's technology. Does it interface with standard electrical fields? Yes, it has to in order to function in your environment. Why? Jake smiled grimly. Because my father was an electrician before he retired. This whole house is wired like a fortress, and I know every circuit. He kissed her quickly, fiercely. Do you trust me? With my life. Then when I give the signal, use whatever abilities you have to amplify electrical current. Can you do that? I think so, but Jake, I love you, he said, cutting her off. Whatever happens, remember that. Before she could respond, he pushed open the door and stepped out into the basement, leaving her hidden in the root cellar. I'm here, he called out. I surrender. The three aliens appeared at the top of the stairs, weapons trained on him. Commander Veltar descended slowly, her expression triumphant. Where is 779? Gone. Jake lied smoothly. She ran when you arrived. Left me behind. Veltar's silver eyes narrowed. You lie. Our scans detected 2 life forms until moments ago. Your scans were wrong. She raised her weapon, pointing it directly at his chest. No matter. Your termination will bring her back to us. Maybe, Jake agreed. Or maybe it will just piss her off. He dove sideways, rolling behind his father's old workbench just as Veltar fired. The energy blast struck the main electrical panel mounted on the wall, and sparks erupted in a cascade of blue-white light. Now, Kira! Jake shouted. From her hiding place, Kira reached out with abilities she'd forgotten she possessed, touching the house's electrical system with her mind and feeding it power, not just the standard current, but the bioelectric energy that powered her own alien physiology. The effect was immediate and devastating. Every circuit in the house overloaded simultaneously, creating a feedback loop that interfaced catastrophically with the aliens' technology. Their weapons exploded in their hands, their communication devices shrieked with electronic death screams, and the humming of their ship outside rose to a painful crescendo before cutting off entirely. In the sudden darkness and silence, Jake heard 3 bodies hit the floor. When he found the flashlight on his father's workbench and clicked it on, all 3 aliens were unconscious, their silver eyes closed, their perfect features slack. They were breathing, but barely. Kira emerged from the root cellar, her own eyes glowing faintly in the flashlight beam. Are they dead? No, but they will be soon if they don't get medical attention. Jake looked at her steadily. The question is, what do we do about it? She knelt beside Commander Veltar, checking her pulse with practiced efficiency. If we save them, they'll just come back with reinforcements. If we let them die, you become a killer, Jake finished, and I become an accomplice. They looked at each other across the unconscious forms of her former people, and Jake saw the moment she made her choice. Help me get them upstairs, she said. We're going to save their lives, and then we're going to change everything. Epilogue. 6 months later, the safe house Jake had designed was hidden in plain sight. A renovation project in downtown Portland that appeared to be a standard apartment building, but was actually a sanctuary for others like Kira. Word had spread. Somehow, through channels Jake was only beginning to understand. There were more of them than anyone had suspected. Alien scouts who had chosen Earth over their original missions, who had found love or friendship or simply a place they wanted to call home. Jake stood on the building's rooftop garden, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and amber. His architectural practice had taken an interesting turn lately.